Welcome to episode 80 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today I have a very special first-time guest on to talk with us about residential real estate, what's going on in the market, all these different things, how they kind of tie together. And I'm sure we'll get into the whole 50-year mortgage idea that was floated and some of the other crazy stuff going on in the world and crazy stuff going on in markets. But Melody, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so I figured we could start right off with some of the 50-year mortgage stuff because that's what kind of came up on my radar. I was like, looking at this, you might as well just be renting because you're still on the hook for maintenance, repairs, all that other stuff. And I'm sure you've been getting a ton of podcast requests too. When everyone hears like 50-year mortgage, it's like, oh, let's reach out to the real estate experts. But I'd love to get into the idea of how that would actually, in theory, make things more affordable, or if it's just another terrible idea invented by people that are like, hey, new financial product, let's fire it up and see what happens. So what are your kind of thoughts on the 50-year mortgage?
Yeah, so I think they're throwing spaghetti at the wall to kind of make it look like they're trying to find solutions, right? Because anybody that would look at historically how the 40-year modification has performed, because there is a 40-year modification now. If you go delinquent on your payments and you have an FHA loan and you need to extend, and actually Fannie and Freddie as well, you can extend for the term for 40 years. But what's happening is because property taxes and insurance have gone up so much, and those have to be included in your escrow and your payment, they're running these mods and the payment's higher than when it was originated. I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's terrible. And also, let's just think about this for a minute. If you kind of take an amortization schedule for a $400,000 home, by year 11, you was paid like $250,000 in interest, year 11, and only paid that balance down by 5%. And, what we know in the mortgage industry is most people either refi or move. Like the average lifespan of a loan is about 7 years. And so you would just be starting all over again without having gained all that equity. And in fact, I think that the median home sales price should be around that $250K. And just think you could have paid that off in 11 years. I mean, that's just insane. Of course, it doesn't work exactly that way. But this is usury, in my opinion. The other thing that people aren't talking about, or not many people picked up on, is the duration risk. And so anytime you extend any product out that longer, you're going to have to pay the market more to take on that risk, which means higher rates. And so it just was a terrible idea beginning to end, and I think what people also miss, what I found so funny about that tweet was, do we really want to harken back to a Depression era president? Because are we finally saying we've been in a silent depression for some time? Because in fact, you go around the world, the United States is very on its own island when it comes to the 30-year mortgage. Most countries do 5 to 7 years, some sort of ARM loan, where it resets with interest rates. And of course, they also don't have the major securitization markets we have, which are fueled by our government-sponsored enterprises as well as, FHA HUD. And so this is a big machine. Like the 30-year came about because they were trying to get us out of the depression last time. What actually, I don't know that actually did a ton, right? It increased home ownership, but then you start getting into these different bubbles that you would see in the 80s, the 90s, and things like that. And what's really what's so different about the housing market now is that it's about investors. It's not about the first-time home buyers anymore. And in fact, NAR, the National Association of Realtors, just put out an article saying that we had the lowest number of first-time home buyer sales last year since they started tracking in the 80s. And so this entire market is about speculation. So that 50-year mortgage is not going to help anybody who's trying to get into a home. It's just going to be an albatross around their neck, and they'd always be starting over. And to your point, it's like renting without benefits. Renting because now you have to replace the roof if something goes wrong. And if you think about 50 years, what most people don't understand is housing is a depreciating asset. What really should be appreciating is your land, because your home, there's wear and tear. And, I think that's another big thing people don't realize is that people stopped making repairs in the last few years because they couldn't afford them anymore, which is another reason why these home prices are nowhere in a rational sphere.
Yeah, and if I remember right, is it median or mean age of like home buyers now is like pushing what 60 years old or something ridiculous. I can't remember which one it was, but I was just looking at the stat. I'm like, that's not healthy. So
The median homeowner is 60, and I think that the median age for first time home buyer was around 40, but I could be getting that stat wrong. So much has flown at us over the last couple of weeks. It's a lot to
yeah,
keep track
yeah.
of. Yeah.
Well, the thing too that you kind of mentioned with rates and like you'll have to pay more, right, for a 30 versus or for a 50-year versus a 30-year, right? If
Oh yeah.
I think they're what 6 to 7% on 30-year mortgages right now, and so
Hmm.
are you not getting a 50-year for anything less than 8, right?
No. Mm-mm.
And
No.
that's where I look at it too. And my guess is that rates are probably going higher over the next
Yeah.
not like 12 months, but like 5 or 10 years. Like my look, we're not going to be going back to 1% unless we want to just run inflation at a ridiculous
Right.
level. So
Right.
um,
That's right.
I think it's basically secular bear market for bonds, and rates are probably going higher. And that, I mean, it'll be make things more affordable on a price perspective, I would think, for real estate, but that we'll have to wait and see. But as far as the kind of demographic trends that could be showing up here in the next 5 or 10 years, one of the things that I think is pretty interesting is where you see how many boomers and silent generation are going to be either passing their homes down or passing on, and their kids eventually sell them. And I
Right.
think it was something like 9 or 10 million houses are expected to hit the market in the next like 5 years. I think by 2030. Um, do you think that makes things significantly more affordable eventually, or do you think it's
Oh yeah.
just a drop in
Yeah.
the bucket?
No, it's not a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's so, 15.6 million boomers will leave us between now and 2035, another 26 million after 2035, and they own the majority of the homes. And a lot of these homes, their children just simply can't afford. They can't afford the property tax, they can't afford the insurance. So this is a huge headwind no one is talking about. It's really kind of bizarre. And in fact, as well as we've overbuilt. So this is going to be a supply story. We've just been in narrative land about this inventory shortage. It was based on spurious logic that was pushed by the industry. I went on the road and disproved it. Not that anybody will acknowledge it yet, but we're getting there. And we've got 15 million vacant homes in this country right now. Another 3 million that are seasonal, like your average home, your average household size is 2.55 people. 10, 15 years ago, that was much higher. And so, during COVID, we pulled forward a lot of household formation that I think now is starting to kind of consolidate back because people can't, and don't kid yourself, it wasn't the extra $1,600 or whatever. It was the PPP, the ERC, the EIDL loans. The boomers helped a lot of the millennials get into a home, and that's where a lot of your all cash sales came from, and as well as investors. And so, yeah, no, the silver tsunami is a massive headwind. And there's going to be so much supply. That of course home prices will have to come down, but nobody wants to acknowledge what's really happening right now.
Yeah, and the one of the things you mentioned on property taxes and insurance, I was talking to my parents over Thanksgiving weekend, and one of the things they bitch and moan about with Florida is what their insurance is compared to the place they have in Washington. But the thing that is interesting there is you've been seeing headlines or different ideas floated about banning property taxes, and it's like, yeah, I mean, in theory, it makes sense because right, it's really an unrealized capital gains tax, which is a bad idea. But in practice, what it's going to do is only make things worse. It's going to exacerbate the current problem, right? So, what are your kind of thoughts on the cross currents with property taxes, insurance, and all these different things, different ideas are being floated?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this before the show. I'm a kind of wait and see till it happens kind of girl because I think, right now the municipalities are addicted to those property taxes. It's their main source of revenue. And so, but I'm a big fan of some of the, take Florida for instance. I think this is an interesting proposition that, its homestead would be eliminated, not, second or investment ownership, which if you think about Florida, there's just so much of that there. Like, so much foreign ownership, so much second property ownership, so many investor Airbnb properties. And so they may be able to get away with it. It's very interesting. But I'm for it, but I also don't know how it would actually happen, right? Because your municipalities are already starting to go bankrupt all over the country. And so, what they did is they got a ton of this American Rescue Act money and they went bananas. And then a lot of them did these like, oh, we're going to have population increased by XYZ. And that was based on, unfortunately, not great stats, right? Like we now know that all of our population gain, or the majority of it last year, was foreign born. And so, because we're not having babies at replacement rate right now. And so, all of these municipalities were like, oh, all these people are going to move here and home prices are going to continue to appreciate and there's no inventory, which was just not true. So, I don't see the path for a lot of municipalities out of this, but I'm watching Florida because I think it's an interesting proposition. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting to hear people talk about immigration and all these different topics where it's like we're going to just keep on suppressing wages and keep on doing the things that we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years. But
Right.
I think there's potentially some, at least, changes in what people are comfortable talking about as far as remigration and other things after the insanity of the last 4 or 5 years, but really my entire life.
It's so
What do you,
true.
what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on the kind of immigration? How that's been like a tailwind for home prices over the last like several decades. But if we kind of flip that switch and go in the opposite direction, how would a potential remigration, be good for wages and in theory bad for real estate prices, and I think good for the average American citizen. But what are your thoughts on how potential changes on our immigration policy might feed into the real estate market?
Yeah. So just to speak to one of your points, it's like, isn't it so fascinating? We can finally actually have dialogue about it again, right? Like it was such a taboo topic that I wouldn't even bring it up, even though as I was traveling to all of these markets all over the country, I knew exactly who were building these homes, and it was not residents of the United States. And so, in many ways, the entire reason we've been able to do this building cycle is because of the illegal immigrants. And then, secondly, the other thing, when it was a taboo subject and we couldn't talk about it, a lot of people told me, well, they're not getting mortgages. And, I kind of was like, yeah, probably not a ton. But now we've got the research and FHA, they were 6% of origination at its height, which is not insignificant. And then you look at these programs, and I was just telling you about one in Portland where you could get a $30,000 down payment assistance if you were foreign born without residency. I mean, and the program got into trouble because regular Americans weren't actually qualified for it. And so that's what a lot of people did with this American Rescue Act money is they created these kind of down payment assistance programs, which is why I laughed when the Harris campaign said $25,000 for everybody down payment assistance. I'm like, you can already get that all over the country. Like there are programs all over the country like that. And so, I think we don't even know the ramifications yet. And so also the other part of it is a lot of places like Chicago did like rent vouchers. They would give $15,000 worth of rent money to illegal immigrants. So we wonder why Chicago has the highest rent increases from all over the country. This is why, because it's fake demand, right? Or subsidized demand. And with all that going away, And it really doesn't even have to be mass deportation. It just has to stop. Like, the growth, and that already has stopped, as we know. And so I don't think we understand yet just how impactful this is. But to your point, that this has gone on for a very long time, including after the crisis, because they wanted to keep the wage price spiral from happening. They were very concerned about inflation after the GFC, and so turning this all around is going to have massive implications. But I think it is going to be good for your forgotten Americans.
Yeah, and the when you're talking about like the different programs, it was just reminded me of like non-citizens can't get entitlements or handouts, and you look at it's like 60% of non-citizens receive some form of welfare or whatever it is, and it's like it's right there in the stats, but it's
Right.
been something where you talk about it and you get vilified for it. But
100%.
anyway, it's it is interesting to see what's kind of happened with some of those changes, but I do wonder as far as what it means for rents versus like renting versus buying and all the decisions that kind of go into that. But I mean, in theory, right, driving wages up and making real estate more affordable is good for the average person, especially younger generations. And that's where you kind of get into the generational divide topic and all these different things
Right.
that you kind of see. And I think it's something where it gets amplified on social media, or it's just a topic where a lot of eyeballs find it interesting. But what are your thoughts on how this kind of plays out over the next 5, 10 years as far as different generations and like kind of the dialogue between the different groups?
Yeah, I think that social media is doing us all a real disservice by trying to, really exacerbate this generational divide. Have the millennials and Gen Zers screaming at the boomers, so we can't all just talk about what's actually happening. But here's the thing: these younger generations can't afford housing. It's just that simple. I mean, it's just that simple, and they've done everything they possibly can to make it different. And so I think that we have to stop looking at what, just kind of the hate that gets furled around all over social media and really think through the topic. Like, okay, so do we want to live in a country where our youth are so upset that they escalate violence? And this is something, that a recent survey came out that said, whereas Gen X and other generations are like, say no to violence, Gen Z doesn't feel exactly the same way. And I think that a lot of that has to do with just how frustrated they are. So I think no matter what the screaming is, we have to get to a place where our younger generations can afford housing. And so I think we will get there. I think about what has to happen versus what everybody's screaming about in the press, because I think that is the point, is to scream. And I think, one of the reasons they were throwing spaghetti at the wall is that they do need to give some lip service to the boomers and be like, we're really trying, but the reality is these asset prices can't sustain if you want an actual functioning society,
Yeah.
which I'm
Yeah.
kind of a fan of. So,
Yeah. I think there's some changes that would be good to make, but when you have like a lot of the typical economists and some of these different figures that are more prominent, when they kind of worship at the altar of like the GDP must go up, then you get
Mhm.
policies of immigration and asset prices must go up and all these different things. And it's it's amazing when you start to go back and look at where housing prices were when like previous generations were trying to like start families and do all this stuff. But
Mhm.
it's it's pretty frustrating to like look at it and like even talk to older relatives about these different topics, because that like the disconnect is pretty wide there. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an easy fix for that, but um they also didn't have a bunch of things to compete with as far as okay, like the immigration policy and like demographics of the country were way different back then, but also the institutional and like foreign investor side of things is also something that I think we should take a look at. And I mean, you can argue that institutions should be allowed to play in residential real estate, but I think there's something to be said for the idea of banning ownership for residential homes. Like they shouldn't be looked at as just a line on a spreadsheet and something that the BlackRock and Blackstone and some of these different groups can basically rent seek off of. But what are your thoughts on how like the institutional and foreign investor side has played a role? And is there something that you maybe have as a potential fix that's more informed than my just ban it, like get rid of all of it? But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I want to speak to what you were saying about it's so frustrating talking to the older generations because they've been watching Fox or even CNBC and the avocado toast, and everybody's just lazy now, and so I totally get it. And I hope somehow we can get to actual dialogue about this soon. But in terms of the institutional, let me tell you, they got in at the invitation of our GSEs and FHA. So our government sponsored enterprises begged them to come and buy those homes at the end of the last cycle. And so if we got government out of mortgage, I think that would be enough to let the true market dynamics play out. And that can sound really scary. It's kind of like the debate around the professional degrees for
Same
student
thing for student
loans.
debt. Yeah.
Right,
That's what I was about
exactly.
to say.
A lot of people I talk to initially are like, but then you can't get a nursing degree or you can't do this or that. And I'm like, well, actually, where they put the loan limits lower for student debt, what did universities and they lowered tuition. And it would be so right now, just last week, I think it was last week, time's moving like so fast. But Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac came out with their conforming loan limits. And if you're not familiar with this, it's going to be funny. What do you think that the regular price loan limit is for a GSC loan?
I have no clue. I haven't looked that closely at some of
Yeah,
those
but
policies.
fair, right? The median home price right now in the country is around, if you look at NAR, it's around 415,000 right this moment. Well, the loan limit is 832,000. That's a jumbo loan. like
Yikes.
like why is the government assisting at that place in the market? Like if we want these government programs to truly help with affordability, shouldn't those loan limits be lower? I mean, why are we what so if we got government out, they would have never sold them to the institutional investors in the first place, because they brought too many people in the door. What I think another thing is a lot of people think about the last crisis as a subprime crisis. That was a component. What the material delinquency actually came in the prime books. That's what caused the foreclosure crisis. And so, I personally, if we got government out of mortgage or we kind of curtail their activity, I think we would see loan limits come down. I mean, sorry, home prices come down way faster than by banning the institutionals. But I wouldn't be opposed to maybe banning institutional and foreign born for a couple of years, like just say, hold on, let's like recalibrate here. But I'm kind of a free market person. It's just we haven't had a free market in a very long time. So,
Yeah.
that's the really frustrating. But honestly, if today they announce that no, it's not 800,000, the new loan limit is $425,000, you would have a radically different housing market overnight.
Yeah. It's I'm gonna share my screen here because it's just this cycle over and over. I got this from a friend where it's just subsidized demand repeatedly, and it's that seems to be like the reaction where it's like, okay, 50-year mortgage and all these different policies and um, different things with Fannie Mae, and it's just frustrating. It's frustrating,
It's very
but
frustrating.
I guess that's maybe something that is a topic worth getting into and see if you have any different views on. Because I have a couple of friends that have talked about Fannie Mae and what's going to happen there, and is interesting investment case. But I just look at it, and I'm like, I have no edge there, no area of expertise. I find it interesting, but do you have any thoughts on the whole like Fannie Mae and what's going on there? Because I know it's something that a lot of value investors look at and they find it interesting.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. By the time we get there, so what would happen is kind of what happened last time. If they were allowed to buy MBS, whatever flavor of the privatization you're looking at, they would just be kind of like a self-consuming snake. And I don't see this happening. I could be wrong, but to me, this is another thing where they're trying to keep Ackman, in the money until he needs to sell. And by the time they would be ready to do something like this, Fannie and Freddie are going to start getting into trouble, because right now you can look at their debt to income reporting on their books, and we are at 2008 levels for DTI, meaning that those consumers are cost burdened, and your trouble's about to start there. It always starts in FHA and your kind of lower credit quality lending, but it always ends up in your prime books. And I think we are at the stage of the cycle, especially with these layoffs, where delinquency will start to increase. And so the liquidity strain on the agencies will become real. And I think it would make any kind of offering less attractive. But, who knows? They may move forward with it, but I'm not at all interested, because I've seen this play and I know where this is going to end up. And so, I just kind of, it's one of those things where, let me see when there's real action. Every time like the stock price kind of falters a little, you'll get another article about how it's imminent, but it's been imminent since the beginning of the year. And so, I think there is just kind of a game right now. It's kind of performance.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to trade on headlines too if you don't have
Right.
some inside help. So
Right.
the thing that is interesting about all that stuff, where I just look at it and I don't really feel all that excited about anything related to housing or building or
Right.
like remodeling. And I know some people are like bullish on home builders and like excited about some of these different things. And it's, I just put it in the too hard pile and move on to other ideas. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, like I look at what real estate prices are and what's going on, and I can't really connect those dots. But like,
Right.
what are your thoughts on like the whole home building sector and people that say, oh, the valuations are cheap and all these different things? Is there something there if it somehow manages to continue to accelerate, or is it just a mirage?
I think Buffett is in it as a bailout play. I mean, when my former company got into trouble, he got a phone call and bought a lot of our distressed stuff. And so, like, Lennar got a bailout last time. There's likely going to be a couple of builders that get bailed out, and around some form of, hey, if you offer this much of your inventory as affordable housing, we'll give you XYZ, right? I think we're going to see something like that. And in fact, we already have some of those programs. So the only thing I would say to people, I mean, the builders are in terrible, terrible, terrible trouble. Like, there is, what they say is inventory is not accurate. I'd say there's about 25% more inventory out there than they actually report. And I've seen it on the road. So they are in serious trouble as well. There was a recent study done about these buybacks, which they have not been reporting correctly. What they do is they make it an advance commitment. And so there's a rule that you can only kind of, depending on which loan it is, if a seller concession is over 6%, then that's not allowed. And they've been skirting that rule, but it's now getting airplay. So they're about to get into a little trouble around those seller concessions that they haven't been. They've kept the headline price up, but when we last got builder results, which was a few months ago, they had revised the previous month, and that sales price had come down below 400,000. And if you do all the incentive, like if you deduct the incentives from their median price, you're looking at around a 350,000. And only like one other time in history have we seen new home prices be less than existing home prices, and that was in 1 month in 2005. And we've seen that consistently for the past year or more. And so, I think the builders are in serious trouble. I think a lot of the regionals, they're going to just get crushed. But I think, as always, there's going to be somebody left to dance, just to kind of partner with the government, and it'll do okay, just like Lennar did. But, I don't think this is a value. I think their pain has just begun.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear, I can't remember what percent of homes were getting like the rate buy downs where like they're basically doing the same thing of subsidizing new
That's
home
right.
buyers. But do you think the gap between new versus existing homes has anything to do with build quality? Like, has the build quality been going down in the last like 5 or 10 years, or is it pretty much stable?
I have a colleague who's a developer builder, and I think it's always there's always you always have a lot of crappy building. So I don't think that's why we're seeing lower prices. I think that they just got the memo, and they are very different from an individual homeowner who, like a boomer who maybe like your parents, who says, I might need to sell one of these homes the next couple of years, and then they put it on, they list it, and they're like, I don't, I want to wait a little while. A builder, they have a promise they've made to the street. And so this is a production line. And so they got the memo, and they have been reducing prices however they can, but making it's that top line price is a mirage.
Yeah, they have to move the inventory somehow, I guess.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
um, one of the things we chatted about a little bit, and I think is pretty interesting, if you kind of look at broader markets and what's been going on with AI spending and all these different things, and how it kind of connects to like what's going on with asset prices, right? When a bunch of people are basically getting S&P welfare, as some people like to call it, of
Hmm.
has to go up 15% a year, or problems start to happen. And like you kind of see what's going on with AI and these different things. What are your thoughts on how AI, like equities, different asset prices, kind of connect to real estate? And do you think that is something that we see start to be an issue maybe from now until the end of 2026?
Yeah. So if you kind of trace back, home prices had started to come down in late 22, early 23. And, then we had the banking crisis, and we had, the Fed come in with the BTFP. And yeah, I'll give you 100 cents on that asset versus, the 60% it's worth or whatever. And then at the same time, you suddenly started hearing about Nvidia, and you really can trace that narrative to back then. And I remember one of my followers saying, "So is Nvidia going to hold up the entire market?" But I think what we are in is it's a ruse. It's a smoke screen for just how bad the economy is, and I don't think that there are certainly efficiencies that can be gained. There are certainly ways this technology could be used to be more efficient, but corporate America is in such bad shape right now that they can't even affect these things because they don't have the will. And what I mean by that is, like, before we used to actually invest in research and development, but now we invest in share buybacks and things like that. We used to invest in our people. That social contract has been completely, decimated. And so when my
And now
last,
they invest in offshoring, right?
in
That's
offshoring, so
yeah.
an example, I can say working at several fintech companies after I left Mortgage Proper, I wanted to create the technology. I saw the promise. However, the effort was so massive that it just became cheaper for, these companies to make decisions to just have a big room full of Indians doing the work instead of actually finishing or putting the effort into what it takes in the technology. Because this isn't easy. I mean, that's these large language models trying to keep them in check, because the more you give them, the more they get off the rails. And so it's a constant, like, you're trying to get them back on the rail. And I've seen it fail for things that it should absolutely be able to do. So funny story, Saturday, I guess, I'm Googling what, Alabama Auburn game, like what time is it? And it was 8 o'clock in the morning. And AI Google said, Alabama beat Auburn 27-24 on November 29th. And I'm like, the game hasn't even happened yet,
What was
So
the final score?
27-20. I think,
No.
yeah, I think
Okay.
that's
Pretty
accurate.
close then.
Right. Right. So anyway, but it's just things like this where it's just not there yet. And it's going to take a whole lot of effort. And right now, I think we're doing stupid spending if we're actually spending at all. And you think about that it's the round tripping chart. Like this guy's giving 10 billion, that's giving 5. This is fake money. This is this
Yeah.
is fake money,
I,
and
I've seen some colorful memes on it that are
yeah,
maybe not
yeah,
fit to share, but
right,
you get the picture
right,
where it's like it's
right,
just a merry-go-round of
right.
yeah.
And nobody's cared, and nobody's cared about there's also inherent fraud in a lot of these companies that my colleague Nobody Special has been calling out for 2 years, but nobody's cared. But suddenly we've had a lot of narrative busting in the last couple of months. I would say you are now seeing what I would call CYA coverage in mainstream media on these things, like, well, some people say it's a bubble, so that they can say when it does happen that they were covering it. But I think that we could be at a point here where I saw a stat this morning that 53% of investors think that AI is a bubble. So we might be getting to that critical mass. And I would not want to be holding equities and, be invested in these stocks when that happens, because it could happen fast and furious.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've started to notice too is that when things shift, the markets seem to price things in even faster. I don't know if it's just the amount of information out there or like social media amplifying different moves, but you see certain narratives get picked up and the market prices it in very quickly and probably like overdoes it on in both directions on some of these things.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I find like the stuff going on in commodities now, where like you're talking about the CNBC, right, talking about the bubble, and I see them now like, oh, we're gonna start talking about silver a little bit. It's like, yeah, that's kind of interesting timing, but
Mhm.
it is funny to see how like narratives and some of these different things have an impact. Do you think we're kind of getting to like you kind of mentioned that we're maybe getting to that point for equities and kind of the AI trade, but do you think we are maybe going to see something like that happen for real estate in 2026?
Yeah. So interestingly, my life got really interesting last week, and this was even after the 50 year. But probably 2 weeks ago now, on the same day, there was an article in Bloomberg, and an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about houses sitting, and that perhaps people need to understand they need to do price reductions if they want to sell their homes. Now, it's fascinating to me that on the same day, these two major, news publications. Then I did an interview with Adam Taggart that we did a little more than our usual interview, but we've had him go this big before. But Newsweek picked up the story, misquoted me as saying that I thought that we would have a 50% reduction in prices next year. I emailed them, tried to get that corrected, and they finally did correct it after almost 36 hours.
After
And
everyone's already seen it.
after everybody's seen it, I mean, my brother-in-law sent it to me. He saw it on Facebook, and I mean, he's not in our world, okay, at all. Then Unusual Whales tweets it out, I think yesterday or the day before. It's at now 7.6 million views. Okay. And so this is, whatever the timing is, whatever, I believe this national debate has begun. And I think that, kind of pushed forward by our mainstream media. So, yes, I think that the narrative busting has just started in earnest. And 2 weeks before the story on existing home sellers, there was an article in Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal on the same day about the builders and kind of their buildup of inventory and the trouble for them. So I think the narrative is changing, for whatever reason, I don't know. But it was fascinating to be part of that, where they picked up what I said and misquoted it, and to see that kind of go out into the national stage was just it's been very bizarre few days.
Yeah. No, it is funny to see what goes viral on social media because it's like you have some obvious things and other things that you wouldn't maybe always expect. And I guess that the follow-up question is like you got misquoted saying it's 50% or right. They're trying to, I'm sure, generate clicks. But
Oh yeah.
what are your thoughts on like where does like the average price settle? Where does the right price to income level, like where does this settle out in your view?
Yeah, we have to go back to historical norms. And I saw somebody else pick up that I was like, it had to match median income. What I meant by that is the historical relationship. If you think about Ford, he wanted to make sure that his employees could buy a car if they worked for him. And so on an average salary back then, you could buy 2.2 cars in 1 year. Now, with an average salary working in auto, you can't even buy one. And so you can look at home prices over time, you can see that they were just flat. I mean, just flat. And they tracked in a very nice relationally to household median income. And then in the 70s, when, our last bout of inflation meant that women had to come into the workforce at scale, that's when you started seeing home prices come up a little bit. Because what happened then as women went into the workforce? Well, a lot more divorces, a lot more, household formation for the wrong reasons. And then ever since then, we've just keep going back to housing to kind of juice the economy. So I think we have to get back to where it logically matches household median income. And any person in banking and mortgage is going to tell you, you can go to the Fannie Mae website, FDIC, that your housing cost should not be more than 28 to 30% of your take home pay. Yet that's not what is in their models when they approve your loan. And so we have to get to that place again. And so I think over time that will happen as speculation gets washed out of the markets. It'll take a lot of time, but I see, I did quick math in that interview and said, that's going to be nationally around 38%. In some places it's going to be more, some places is going to be 50% or more. But if if housing is about shelter, then it has to match that household median income. And I don't know if you saw Mike Green's amazing piece
Yep.
last week, where he believes kind of the new poverty line is $140,000. And, people can argue around some of the costs and math, and he picked a higher in, suburb, but that's right. I mean, when you really look at the cost it takes to live, like the poverty line is not $30,000. I mean, nobody could live on $30,000. I mean, they might be able to live in their parents' basement, but probably not have a car note, because they're probably paying student loans, which is so many people. So anyway, it's yeah. My goal, or what I hope to see, is housing becomes so boring nobody ever wants to talk about it. And I think we have to get to where it's about Joe and Jane getting a home and shelter versus investment and speculation.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things where you see like different attitudes and shifting priorities, where I think there's going to be a lot of things that change and what people are focused on, right? Where you talk about, right, women going to the workforce, what that does to real estate and what it does to fertility rates and what it does to society and culture and all these different things. I think there are a lot of places where the like financialization, hyper financialization of the economy has distorted what society and culture should be about. But
Correct.
I just look at it as, okay, if this is a place to, right, raise a family, have kids, do all the stuff like that, I think is more healthy than we bought it for 400,000 and cap rate is X and we're going to
Right.
sell it for 20% gain in 3
Right.
years and make X% IRR. Like,
Right.
I
Right.
think that it's fine for like other forms of real estate, but it really is tough to see what it does to residential, because that's, I think, should be separate. And I think there's
Mhm.
some potential fixes. I don't know how exactly you'd go about getting all the institutions to offload some of their existing holdings, but I think that's something that definitely should be looked at, because
Yeah.
I
Well, they're
mean,
doing it right now. I mean, I met a month ago with one of the largest holders of this stuff, and they are, as soon as lease is up, they're rehabbing and selling it. I mean, and especially in these really saturated institutional investor markets like Atlanta, Tampa, San Antonio. So it's happening by sheer math. Like they don't get a homestead exemption. I mean, and property taxes in Texas are no joke, for instance. And so I think it's happening. And I think that'll accelerate because for like a couple of years, what they were doing was selling them to each other at inflated prices so they could turn around and get different financing or
playing musical
refinance.
chairs. Yeah.
Exactly. It's starting to happen, and most of them are net sellers at this point. And if they're buying from someone, it's usually from a builder or some other institutional player where they can kind of do some fancy accounting so that they can then turn around and get more financing.
Do you think that feeds into like rents for multifamily apartments? And do you think that we'll see more affordable? Like, obviously, depends on the market, but do you think we'll see more affordable rents here in the next 2-3 years?
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's been kind of funny, shocking to kind of watch it not happen sooner, especially in these saturated markets where they just overbuilt multifamily like crazy. And a lot of it was luxury. But again, it's the same game that the builders are doing. They're giving, we'll give you 3 months of free rent, plus we'll pay your gym, your cable, or whatever. So they don't have to reduce that top line price. And then you go into how each of these different rent indexes, some of them are same store sales. That's a little different, especially if people can't move because they can't afford to move versus, new. And so we're still in the shell game, but Apartment List came out and they're an industry publication, and they saw the largest jump in October, or like largest decline in rent prices that they'd had. I can't remember since when, but it's been a minute. And so I think absolutely rent prices are on their way down because you just have so much competition in all these markets where you're seeing this increased for sale inventory. You're also seeing increased single family homes for rent. I mean, and not small increases like 20%, 30% year over year. And then of course, all the multifamily isn't actually really listed for that. They'll list like one apartment when they've got maybe 300 or 400 doors they need to rent. I mean, back in 23, when I went on the road, I saw Evergrande style apartment buildings that were completely empty. I mean, so, it's been crazy to watch how long it takes, but awareness takes a lot of time. And once we get awareness, we're going to start seeing those rent declines, and it's going to, gradually then suddenly, because it just takes awareness for people to, start freaking out and making different choices because they have to.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if it happens here in Boise. There's been, I think, like 4 like massive apartment buildings that have just been completed in the last like 12 months. And now my building is actually doing the same thing you said on concessions, where it's like, oh, you get 1 month or 2 months off, and the throw some other stuff in for good measure. But sounds like they're having trouble like filling to an occupancy rate that the management company wants. So
Right.
it's something that I think will potentially maybe take till summer, because I know that's like big kind of turnover for a lot of these buildings. But
Oh yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out next year. But
Yes.
as far as to kind of wrap up with kind of a 30,000 foot view question, how do you think this all plays into markets and where capital is going to rotate over the next like 12 months to 3 years maybe? And how do you kind of look at, okay, I don't want to be in equities, I don't want to be in real estate, but there are opportunities out there. Like, where do you think capital is going to rotate into over the next couple of years?
Well, I think that's kind of a hard one because it is a really dicey time out there right now. But I think that it's not going to be in real estate. That's not where it's going to be going. There's going to be a lot of capital destruction there. And so I think so sorry, I'm going to get way 30,000 feet out there. It seems like we're marching to war wherever. I mean, take your pick, I guess. And so I think what we can see is a lot of capital is going to move to defense. And I think so. I have a new theory that I need to chase down, but I think a lot of this, investment and sort of new power alternatives could actually be about actually shoring up the grid that it's in a very precarious position right now. And so we need to do that. Like I look back and I think about, the CARES Act, and we were talking about doing all these infrastructure projects. Had we done that instead of like sending all this money out to these municipalities to do these subsidization, then we would be way better off right now. But I think I see most, unfortunately, like what I see right now is going to be going to defense. But I think if you're in real estate, you are going to be in survival mode for the next 3 to 5 years. And I don't mean extend and pretend survival mode. I mean, like it's coming home to roost. And in that building that you thought was worth $120 million is really only worth $35 million. And you're going to have to take that loss. And so I think we're about to see a lot of capital destruction. I don't know if that helps.
No, it is interesting to think about because like you kind of see different things in markets where I look at what gold and silver have been doing, like the precious metals, hard assets, commodities, and equities in that sector. And my thesis has been like, hey, a lot of these are cheap, and that's where I like to hang out for investments. But there's a lot of stuff where I look at it and there's no way to do this outside of like shorting publicly traded stocks. But if you could go and sell like some of these like properties that I see, I've kind of talked to people that are in commercial real estate, and if you could sell those at those valuations and do cover it later, I would. But it's one of those things where I don't know how a lot of people are gonna get out of it, because I think it's just gonna be it's gonna be a circus for commercial and circus for a lot of the residential side as well, especially if their balance sheet is not in great shape.
Exactly. And I honestly think, and I talked to someone at Trip and he disagrees with me, but I think multifamily could end up being worse than office, just based on what I've seen, and in terms of also people getting hurt. And that's another place where government's involved because they do CMBS. And so, it's just, I just think, I honestly do lay awake every night thinking, what could they do to stop this train? Like, because they've done so much. Like the intervention they did in the mortgage market after COVID is just, it's just bonkers. And so the next thing you could do is give away free homes. That's really where we are now. But do you want to be the person giving away free homes? You will be the most stalked person on the planet. Because how do you decide who gets home B and who gets home C? It could get really crazy out there. And so I think we've reached the end of what they can do. Can they kind of slow it down again? Sure, of course, but in terms of what's really going to, I think market fundamentals are going to have to play out here.
Yeah, so more rate cuts is not going to save real estate if we go down another 50 basis points or whatever people are expecting.
We're down 150 basis points and rates are about where they were before they started cutting. People fundamentally don't understand that relationship. But no, the rate cuts are, and even buying MBS, they bought MBS in 2009. It didn't stop anything. What finally stopped home price decline were the institutionals coming in and buying it up. But who's going to be the buyer now when these property taxes and insurance are so high they can't cash flow? It's not going to be the institutionals, which everybody always says, but it's like, no, they're selling them now. So
not at anywhere near today's prices, that's for sure.
Not at today's prices. Could they come in again if prices hit the sure? But I think this reminds me a lot about, books you read about the Great Depression and when everybody wanted to be a landlord, like everybody for a few years, and then no one wanted to be a landlord. And I think that we're getting very close to the no one wants to be a landlord. And you can see it in the narrative shifting in social media where like all of a sudden everybody that was in big RE bros are now Bitcoin bros, and trying to sell their properties. And it's like, because people realize this is a real headache. Like things break, people are also crazy. And if you're in somewhere like Chicago, you're not even going to be able to evict anybody, or California or New York. And so, yeah, I think we're getting to the point of pain.
Well, it'd be a tough time to be chasing Bitcoin after the ride that's been over the last like 3 months. But it is interesting because you see a lot of people start to chase shiny objects, and crypto is the epitome of all that. And I mean, I guess number go up is a good enough thesis for some, but I understand the fundamental, like what the white paper said and all that, but I still can't bring myself to own any. And this is maybe a last wrap up question as far as like, do you see anything where crypto and is that interesting at all to you, or is it just kind of another liquidity bubble that is going to be in the same boat as equities and real estate, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I have a lot of smart friends that believe in it, and I respect them, but I don't believe in it. And I think as well that paper suspicious origins. I think that there's a lot of shady actors that are involved, as well as our government, as well as, so I I haven't had time. Again, this is another headline, but didn't they just come out over the past couple of days and say that countries are going to have to report on exactly what these transactions were, who made them. It's all going to have to be under know your customer, or KYC, which we do in the banking world. If that's the case, like I don't see the case for this. And that goes against what everybody that I think I know that believes in Bitcoin was in it for. And so it feels to me that could it have had some potential? Sure. But they have appropriated that potential. And now it is another speculative asset that isn't going to do any of the things. And it's suddenly funny. Talk about narrative busting. I don't know if you remember, right up kind of on the way to the FTX scandal, we were all talking about Tether. Like, I mean, this is crazy. This isn't a stable coin. Look at this. They're holding commercial paper, for God's sakes, And then suddenly that narrative just died. Remember, it's like nobody's talking about Tether anymore. It's just like suddenly we're talking about Tether again. We're talking about the fact that they haven't had real audited financials. And so it kind of feels like we're at the point of the cycle where it almost feels like a scheduled demolition. But no, I mean, I would not personally be holding Bitcoin, but I'm very risk averse as well. Please don't follow me for investment advice. I'm a keep it in cash or gold and silver. I mean, that's right now. And I've been that way since 2022. And no, I'm not getting rich, but also I'm not in debt. And also, I've made a lot of moves so that if the pain that I think is coming happens, I'm going to be in a much better position than people that have leveraged 4 to 5 times on these assets.
Yeah, you're not a Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy, and that's I think maybe the most ridiculous of all these things, where people go and talk about how like some of the price targets you see on that stuff is just insane, and then you've got 3 times levered ETFs. There's just more financialization, but it is one of those things where I kind of lean towards the tulip bubble camp.
Oh, 100%.
And it's maybe there will be a time where Bitcoin's interesting again, but basically, like you said, it's completely changed from what the original thesis was to now there's ETFs and futures. And I think it's probably going to be something where the Wall Street guys can basically play with it like they do with gold for a long time. And I think
that's happening right now, right? I think that's like when I look at what's happening to it right now, I look at it as a liquidity weather vane. It tells me where are we with liquidity in the system, and you can see liquidity draining out of the system. And I think that's what it's telling me right now. So yeah, I think Wall Street is playing around with it bigly. as is the government to some degree, which those two things combined make me very much not into it. But
Yeah.
again, I might be missing something, you know?
Yeah. Especially when there's no like assets to back it up or no company with cash flows or
Right,
whatever. Right. So
right,
yeah,
right.
it is interesting though, like to think about, but I just it goes in the too hard pile for me. So um as we're trying to wrap up here, I do have to ask my traditional closing question, which is what book should add to my reading list? Can be history, finance, anything that you think would be interesting.
Just one. I think the one that I think people should really read is The Price of Time by Edward Chancellor. I don't know if you've read it yet, but it is kind of the history of interest rates going back before we could even write. And, what kind of the conversation about how interest rates actually function in society as well in a monetary system. And so that one is a really, really good one. And then I'll just quickly, if you're interested in speculative land bubbles or housing bubbles, Bubble in the Sun or Swamp Peddlers are two excellent books, focused primarily on Florida. But when you read those, you can just see this. We've done this several times before, and that's what we've done again.
Yeah, no, I have. I think I have Price of Time on the bookshelf. I haven't gotten around to reading it, but I'll
So
definitely
good.
add
Yeah.
the other two to the list. It's tough. My list keeps getting longer because every time I have a podcast, I ask for an additional book, and there's been a couple of repeats, but definitely a lot of interesting books that I wish I had more time to read. But I think there's a lot to be said for looking at history and looking at interest rates and
Yes.
looking at where we are kind of in some of these different cycles as far as markets and current events. And I think a lot of people are asleep at the wheel, and you have
Yeah.
this passive investing thing where people have just gotten accustomed to, oh, the market goes up every year and
Right.
maybe we'll get a pullback and then you just buy more. And
Right.
I don't know. I think that's you look at some of these valuations and it's eventually going to be like gravity, but who knows
Right.
when. So
Exactly.
if
Exactly.
yeah, if the listeners are looking to find your work or find your social media, where can they find you on Substack or on Twitter?
Sure. On Twitter, I'm M3 underscore Melody. My Substack is also called M3 Melody Substack. And then I have a YouTube that I post to infrequently, M3 Melody YouTube.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking out. I read the Substack, and it's definitely interesting stuff. The social media, especially when you get going in some of the back and forths, are always entertaining. But I think anyone interested in real estate and what's going on there should definitely give you a follow.
Thank you.
I think people that are listening to this, made it this far, definitely got a lot out of it. I definitely enjoyed our conversation. So I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.